like that why turned into just being able to figure it out, like being able to put like all of the pieces together. Like I just viewed it as this like immensely complicated puzzle where I had to figure out how to do the physical piece, I had to figure out how to do the tactical piece, I had to figure out how to do the gear piece, I had to figure out how to do all of these different, you know, pieces like within the race to kind of make them all come together like harmoniously. And that was like a really big, that was a really big driving factor. I mean, that's why I did all the stupid night runs and ran up to the top of Pikes Peak and got a pizza and things like that. It's just because I had this, you know, curiosity about how they would all, you know, come together and like ultimately unfold on race day. So there's an interesting progression from, you know, one where it was like some sort of like physical proof point. And then once I started to get into it, like I really just became genuinely curious and how it all was going to fit together. And that served a really big purpose for me.
Buongiorno, everyone. Welcome to a brand new episode of the Billy Yang Podcast. Thank you for once again downloading this episode, bringing me along on your run, on your drives, wherever you may be listening, however you may be consuming this via YouTube. Yes, we are recording this yet again, and I am having fun with it, playing around with it, getting creative with it. So thank you if you are in fact watching this. But to those of you who are listening, welcome just the same. This is a new episode. We have a fantastic repeat guest, and excited to delve into that. First of all, and I'll try to keep this preamble short because we do have a rather full show today, but I'd be remiss if I didn't shout out all the people, all the wonderful people who came out to the precursor of the Rich Roll live event. We had an amazing turnout. I think about like 50 plus people showed up. Thanks again to the aid of coaches Chris Hout, to Mario Fraioli for helping me lead the run. Sally was supposed to come, but she came down with a little stomach thing, so she had to bail at the last minute. To Ali Rogers for capturing the morning via film. What else? We also had Patreon supporter Mark, who helped flip some pancakes and also bought Mario and I dinner before the live show. And of course to Rich for putting on that amazing event. It was a really cool evening. Got to meet some additional wonderful people that wasn't at the event. So the whole day was really action-packed, really cool. As I mentioned several times over, I love the community building aspect of it. In fact, as of the time of this recording, tomorrow I am going to San Antonio for work, and I'll go into more in depth on that maybe in a future episode. But while I'm there and I have the first night free, I am going to be hosting a gathering, if you will, just a run / beer dinner, something to take place after to continue the community building. But I've never been to San Antonio. I'm super excited to go. And I'll be there for maybe 3 days or so. It's a rather short work trip, but excited for that nonetheless. So probably by the time you listen to this, it will have happened because it's taking place tomorrow. And I doubt this episode will go out tomorrow. Okay, so let's get into it. I believe that's the only order of business. Let me take another. I made a tradition to sip on some of this fine tequila, Casamigos Reposado. Not a sponsor, but I'm a grown-ass man by now, and I like Daddy likes his spirits. So imagine, if you will, 200 miles, and not just 200 miles, but 200 miles plus 80,000 feet of vertical gain all around the beautiful but treacherous and gnarly Aosta Valley of Italy. This is actually on the Italian Alps side. So if you are familiar with, say, Chamonix, where many people go every year for UTMB, the following week is the TDG, or the Tour de Geants. And the stats I laid out are gnarly, but there's still in excess of 700 people show up and tackle this event, this beast, head on. So much props to them. And one of those people is a good friend of mine, and a repeat podcast guest, Coach Jason Koop, decided to join me virtually this time. You guys know I do prefer to sit across from that person and delve into conversations in person and live, but there was something about the trying to capture the immediacy of, or try to capture, his side of the story before it, I don't know, kind of faded back in mind. It has been almost a month since he finished. So I wanted to get him on the show, but there was no real opportunity until, like, say, November before we would be face to face. So we decided to do this virtually, and I'm glad we did. Hopefully it turned out okay. And what else? Yeah, I'm going to keep this preamble short. Let's get right into the episode. Koop has a lot of interesting stories and tidbits to come from Tour de Giants. We also cover some more recent events, like the whole scandal with the Nike Oregon project, so that comes later, and a couple of other things. Some quickie, like speed round type questions a little bit later that I hope you also find interesting. But before we launch into this episode, parents, there is some adult language sprinkled throughout this episode, just to forewarn you. Again, as I've alluded to before, it's probably easier to call out an episode that doesn't have a little adult language, but again, it's just my lexicon, how I talk. Sorry in advance, but please help me welcome for the third time, Mr. Jason Koop, all the way in Colorado Springs. Enjoy the episode, you guys. So I haven't really done the count, Koop, but I do know for a fact that this is your third appearance on the show, which might make you the leader in the clubhouse. I'm not positive. I'm trying to think back. I know Tim Tollefson has been on at least twice. Zach Miller has also been on twice, but this is your third appearance. So welcome once again to the Billy Yang podcast, Koop.
Yeah, that is quite an honor. I don't know what the honor is, though, whether it's being the leader of the pack or just being your most intense man crush. We'll have to decide.
Jeez, we're going to start off that strong. Intense man
always.
Crush, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
Just because I profess my love to you offline does not mean it is a man crush. It just means I love you because you bring a lot to the table, man. You really do. So anyway, welcome back, Koop. Obviously, we have a lot to cover by way of the Tour de Giants, which happened. How long has it been now? Since, as of now, we are, what is this, October 5th?
5th, yeah.
Yeah. I know it happened right after. So it's been about a month now, right?
Yeah, it's funny, as I was actually thinking about that this morning. It's been about a month since I started, but only 3 weeks since I finished. So anyway, I did take that. I did take that long. I mean, it took me 4 days, right? But still, I mean, I've never had to think about that in a race situation before. Being like, okay, do I start like timing my whole recovery phase from the start of the race or from the end of the race? Like that's never been a consideration. But like I said, it just shows the absurdity of everything.
Yeah, well, to the handful of people who don't know what Tour de Giants is, I think now's a good time to set it up. Otherwise, this joke's going to go right over their head. Set it up, Koop. What the hell's TDG?
I'll set it up. So it's like I always get my stats messed up here. So I've got my little split chart here that I made.
Well, we don't have to be precise.
I know. So it's 330K through the Italian Alps in the
which
Aosta
is about
Valley.
200 miles.
Yeah, a little over 200 miles, 210 miles or something like that.
Yeah.
80,000 feet of climbing on the whole loop. So just a lot of up and down and up and down. It starts and ends in Courmayeur.
In meters for our international audience. We don't
so meters, it's like 24,000 meters of climbing.
Yep.
So it starts and ends in Courmayeur, which most people will be familiar with. That's the like 80K point of the UTMB race, and it's the start of the CCC during the whole UTMB experience, and it's actually the week after all those races. So anyway, that's the race setup. Really, really big line. Extremely popular race in Europe. I think they had 700 starters this year, and it's a apply by lottery type of race, and it's not easy to get in. And then they have all of these other races that kind of revolve around the weekend as well, including an even longer 430K. This is the first year they did this one. It's a 430K race that they call Tour de Glacier. So it just tags all the glaciers around the valley, and then 130K race, and then 30K race as well. So quite a lot of events going on at the same time.
I actually didn't know about the longer version.
It was insane. I mean, it's kind of funny because they started, let's see, we started on a Sunday and they started on Friday, I think. And those two courses shared some of the same trails, and so we'd see them every so often, and just understanding that they had been out there for an extra 2 days and were probably at least 100K further into their journey than we are. Just kind of added perspective to thing. But yeah, it is a big line, much more of a adventure racing type of setup, where they had like all the high alpine refugios kind of set up to service those athletes doing that race. But yeah, really really big line.
So I mean, look, when it comes to races, I'm rarely interested in the how of things, right? It's always, I'm naturally more curious about the why, and you tackle something as gnarly as a race like Tour de Geants. But in this instance, obviously, there is a lot. Over the course of 200 miles, I would imagine there is a lot of pre-race prep that needs to be done, and course studying and coordinating things with your crew, which I believe it was your wife Liz who was nice enough to do that and drive around the entire Aosta Valley chasing your dumbass around the mountains there. But really, the how in this really intrigues me. And we're talking, when you race for, what was it, like nearly 100 hours. How the hell? Well, you know what? Before we even get into the details of the race itself, let's talk about your training, and I referenced this, a few times to you directly. Your training, in all sincerity, has been super inspiring, because from following you on Strava, from following your social media, you were pot committed. You were putting in like really ridiculous days and weeks, like consistently. From when you started to, especially when you really started ramping things up. So let's talk about your training, how you broke it down, and exactly what it looked like, because you threw in some, the occasional curveball into your trainings and your long runs.
I followed a philosophy that I've been really touting for years, and one that I use across all my athletes and almost every single type of event. And that's to do the things that are most specific to the race, closest to the race, and the things that are the least specific to the race, furthest away from the race. And so I found out that I got in, I think, in February. And so all winter I was just doing, fairly low volume, 10, 12 hours a week or something like that, but really high intensity stuff. So I was doing a lot of VO2 max work, a lot of, really high intensity intervals, like 6x3, 8x3, 8x3 minutes hard, 3 minutes easy, things like that. I even did some back-to-back interval days while I was doing that. And I carried that through probably about March or so. And then really after March, I just kind of gradually ramped up the volume, month after month after month after month, and kind of took the approach that I was just going to sell out, and just try to do as much single run volume as I could, as much back to back or 3 days in a row run volume that I could. And then, just as much volume as I could possibly stand. Kind of the counterbalance to that though, is I just gradually shifted everything towards just really low intensity running and low intensity hiking. As an example, there's a standard like loop that I do here from my house in Colorado Springs that has this one climb in it. It's like 1,200 feet or something like that. And ever since I moved here 18 years ago, every single time I hit that climb, I run every single step of the whole climb. And it's not, I don't really have to like push it that much. It's a hard climb. I think it's like maybe so it goes up 700 feet in just about a mile, just to give everybody perspective. So it's not the steepest climb in the world, but it's still, still legit. And certainly if you're trying to take it easy, you would walk instead of run. But I've never hiked it. I hiked that thing all the time during the last parts of, this training, intentionally to try to bring the overall intensity down.
You don't do like heart rate training, right?
Nah, I did it all by RPE. So rate of perceived exertion. And so following that strategy of going from, this low volume, high intensity to kind of like medium volume, medium intensity, and then low intensity and very high volume really fit the pattern of the race, because, being over a 200-mile race, it's not like I can, peg out on any intensity that I could. I originally had the plan to where I was going to do the Nolan's 14 route in preparation for this. I was going to I was going to try to do an early attempt of that, which is still kind of gnawing at me that I didn't really get it done. But with the epic snow in the Sawatch this year, and really throughout all the Rockies, it just kind of compressed my timeline down too much. And so as a consequence of that, I didn't have any races or any events or anything on the calendar throughout the entirety of 2019, with the exception of some small, like local, 10Ks and things like that I was doing in the winter during that high intensity phase. So anyway, the last 3 months was just hiking everything I could find. I used Pikes Peak a lot. I'm really fortunate that I've got a 14er in my backyard. And this summer they've been doing construction on the cog railway that runs to the top. So most people will know Pikes Peak for the Pikes Peak Marathon, and the Pikes Peak Marathon uses the bar trail to go up and down. There's actually a railroad that goes up and down as well, and it's a little bit shorter. It's like in between 10 and 11 miles, when the Pikes Peak Marathon route is 13, obviously. So it's a little bit steeper, and they're doing construction on it this year, so there's no trains running up and down. And so I would kind of very covertly dodge the construction traffic that was going on up there, and I utilized that a lot, which is nice because it's a 7,000 foot climb that's in my backyard. And so I used that, and then once the snow cleared out in the Sawatch range, which is around Leadville and Buena Vista, I used a lot of the climbs in that kind of in that range, because they're kind of easily accessible. And so all in all, I ended up peaking out at, I think I did 4 weeks above 30 hours a week, which that's a lot for me. That's a lot of training for a normal person with a normal job.
That's almost a full-time job in of itself.
Yeah, it's like my highest week, and this is some of this is a little convoluted just because it's the way the days stacked up. But I had 1 week where it was 38 hours, and I remember looking at it at the end, and I was like, oh, I could do 2 more hours and it'd be an even like 40-hour work week. I'm like, that's dumb. Like if I were like, if my athletes asked me that would be like the stupidest idea ever. So anyway, I didn't end up doing it, but yeah, so it is certainly more volume than I've ever been able to do. Came out very fortunately, like completely unscathed, no injuries, no downtime for sickness or anything like that. Like I kept myself like really remarkably healthy. And
hey, Koop, can we park there for a second, because I feel like that is something that is somewhat lacking greatly, I would say, for a lot of people. 100 milers are obviously a lot more common, but when you were talking about that third phase of your training where it was high volume, low intensity, I just feel like that's not something that we, by practice, do enough of. Like that kind of specificity where you almost replicate the 100-mile distance pace, if that makes sense. Like because in the context of 100 miles, I'm, hiking, power hiking, however you want to say it, almost all the climbs. I'm not running up, a 2,000 foot climb, but when I'm doing it in the context of a 15 to 20 mile long run, you're running up it and your brain is off and you're not necessarily thinking about the specificity as it pertains to the race.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I agree with you that I think a lot of people miss that. If you're training like a normal volume, 10, 12, 14 hours a week or something like that, and you're training for a 100-mile race, you're almost always probably in excess of 95% of your training intensity is going to be more intense during training than it is during the race. And that's good. You absolutely need intensity in training. But I think all too often sometimes that intensity is just kind of overplaced in the run of the mill training process, particularly if it takes away from the volume that you can do, or if it like compounds some sort of injury susceptibility that you have. And I think it's worth mentioning, like, I said earlier that I came out of this relatively unscathed. I'm not a bulletproof runner. I mean, I'm not, special runner, elite runner, or anything like that. Like, I get injured and dinged up, and, I've had my fair share of, things to deal with throughout my running life. And, every year I just get a little bit better and a little bit better at managing it. So maybe I'm just a slow learner, but, anyway, I think out of the whole process, the thing that I kind of look back on that was the most critical was just the consistency element, and the fact that I didn't have to take any sort of downtime for, getting sick and or injured.
And specificity.
Yeah. And
key.
I mean, I hiked everything, I hiked everything that I could find. That was a big part of it.
Yeah, but that also affords you the opportunity to really dial in. I would imagine the things that we don't necessarily have to deal with in most races: the poles, the gloves, packs, like how you take in your nutrition. Something as simple as that, like taking your nutrition in and where to stash the poles as you're doing that, and refilling water bottles, and just all these things that we don't really think about. And then it comes to the race, and maybe people develop blisters on their hands because they're using the poles for the first time, and decide that's a good time to bust them out because you don't really need them when you're doing a 20-mile run in your
So as a good example of that, so I mentioned earlier that I was using Pikes Peak a lot. At the summit of Pikes Peak, they have this tourist trap type of summit house where they've got homemade fudge and t-shirts and all kinds of tourist trinkets and things like that. They also have a cafe there, and one of the things that they serve in that cafe is pizza. And I knew, being in Italy, going around the entire valley, I'd use pizza a lot at aid stations where I could actually find them. And so I'd go to the top of Pikes Peak and I'd buy a pizza from them, and I'd eat the whole thing in one setting, and then I'd run down the other side, and then I'd come back up again and I'd buy another pizza, and I'd run back down the front side. And just to your point, right, you have to do the things in training that you think that you're going to do in the race. And I can say that without a doubt, unequivocally, the pizza in Italy is far superior than the pizza
God, I hope so, man.
At the top of Pikes Peak. It's a pretty rough little cafe up there. But anyway, it did its job.
Yeah. Was there anything in the training that you sort of leaned on upon reflection, maybe in the context of a race? Was there any like one run that jumps out at you that really helped build up that confidence, especially in moments of doubt?
Yeah, I always try not to do that. Like, I don't ever put a really big emphasis on any one particular run as a proof point, because I mean, I know as a coach, it's like the entirety of training matters the most.
Well, let me rephrase that question then.
Sure.
Was there one run that really jumps out at you as being like, holy shit, I actually did that, like in the context of a training week, and like something that you ordinarily would not do because you were so, I feel like you were so, like that pizza run you're talking about, you're just so highly attuned and like fixated on how is this going to help improve me, like that one extra step towards TDG. And like there were runs like you started, in the middle of the night in the cold darkness, testing out your gear, your cold gear, and maybe see how your body responded due to sleep deprivation, things like that popped to mind.
Well, so I'll take you through the whole run. I mean, I did all that stuff. I did, several overnight runs intentionally just because I wanted to, test my gear out and just see how my kind of cognitive abilities would, cope with, some of the sleep deprivation and things like that. I did the pizza run, just to try to practice, the nutrition program. And, obviously I had all the hiking, climbing, and descending and things like that. But I would say the most impactful pieces of it was actually when I got over there. So I got to Italy before all the UTMB races, so about 3 weeks before Tour de Giants, and I wanted to see parts of the course, right? And it's just kind of the way my travel worked out as well, where I could get over there a little bit early and piece it together. And so I ended up doing two 50K parts of the course in kind of the most logical sequence that I could put them together. And I tried to do them around the same time of day that I would experience them. So one time was at night, and the other time was during the day. And it was at that point where the whole thing made sense. Like there wasn't anything from like the physicality of doing those runs that was any different. I mean, those were still, 10, 11, 14-hour runs or something like that, right? They're still big, big days in the mountains. And certainly they were worth something from a physical standpoint. But it was at that point where I just got it. And I don't know how else to describe it, but it just all kind of came together in terms of, okay, I can get from here to here to here to here, and it all makes sense. Before then, I just had this, stupid, pacing spreadsheet, that's sitting to my left right now that has these astronomical numbers on them where it's going to take me, 14 hours to go 50 kilometers, and I've got to do that 6 more times. It's like, so it was just hard for me to conceptualize the plan that I'd written down on paper until I could actually kind of get feet on the ground and move from one part of the course to the other. And it all just, like I said, just more psychologically and intellectually, it kind of came together at that point after doing those, two or three big runs that I had actually out on the course.
Before we continue down the nuts and bolts of the actual race itself, let's park on the why. Like, why was this race appealing to you to begin with? Because these numbers just scare the bejesus out of me. Like on paper, 80,000 feet of gain. I don't think I covered that in an entire year, let alone in a single trek. Like how is this? Like, how do you get around the initial being daunted by these numbers to wanting to do it? Aosta Valley is lovely. I understand the aesthetics of it, but why would you dedicate so much time into the training, let alone like the race itself? And talk about the why a little bit.
It actually changed a little bit. So when I first started out, there was definitely like this like acute, want to, test myself. It's longer than I've ever gone before and blah, 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 blah. And something not a lot of people know is I was actually in the race maybe 4 years ago. I got drawn on the lottery maybe 4 years ago. And I had to withdraw because I had some health complications come up that year that, would have been kind of stupid for me to start the race in the first place. And
so this has been on your list for a while.
It's been on my list for a while. I've coached people for it, right? And they've always held it in very high regard. And so it's been kind of gnawing at me to get back to it. And so initially there definitely was some, hey, I want to just test myself in the most raw way possible. It's going to be 3 times as long as I've ever run before from a duration standpoint. And, not to, not to like sound all braggadocious or anything, but I've done some pretty hard races. I mean, I've done Badwater and Leadville and Hard Rock and Western States, and you kind of name it. And so I definitely wanted to, I definitely had like a desire to push the envelope a little bit. But then once I actually got into the race and I kind of got into the process of it, that why turned into just being able to figure it out, like being able to put like all of the pieces together. Like I just viewed it as this like immensely complicated puzzle where I had to figure out how to do the physical piece. I had to figure out how to do the tactical piece. I had to figure out how to do the gear piece. I had to figure out how to do all of these different, pieces like within the race to kind of make them all come together like harmoniously. And that was like a really big, that was a really big driving factor. I mean, that's why I did all the stupid night runs and ran up to the top of Pikes Peak and got a pizza and things like that. It's just because I had this, curiosity about how they would all, come together and like ultimately unfold on race day. So there's an interesting progression from, one where it was like some sort of like physical proof point. And then once I started to get into it, like I really just became genuinely curious and how it all was going to fit together. And that served a really big purpose for me.
Okay, so UTMB is over. You've done all your coaching duties. It's race week for you in Aosta Valley. Tell me about the gear. Like, what did you bring with you? I would imagine they have the same list of general kind of requirement gear for traversing over the mountains.
Yeah, it's an interesting race because it is so big. They basically have two stages of required gear. There's the required gear that you actually have to have on you, so that you have to carry it around the whole time. And that is actually less than most European races. It's like 2 space blankets, your medical card, headlamps with spare batteries, and a phone. There might have been like 1 or 2 other small items on there, but
really?
It was not the long sleeve shirt and the 5 pairs of gloves and a hat and all that stuff. I mean, it is a very minimal.
Is it unique to Italians, or I just assumed all Europeans had a laundry list of things that you just had to do to participate.
This is well, let me get through this. So this is the first year they actually handled it this way. So the stuff that you had on you was actually relatively, it just wasn't that much. It wasn't that arduous.
Okay.
But one of the unique facets of the race is you get this big yellow duffel bag when you check in, and it follows you around the race. So when you leave an aid station, somehow they figure out how to like queue it up in these big, U-Haul trucks. And the next time you get to what they call life bases, which are like the major aid stations that are every approximately 50 kilometers, your big yellow duffel bag is there and they'll pull it for you. And then you can, rifle through it or whatever. You had a more extensive list of required gear in that yellow duffel bag. And that was everything. That's, crampons and, down jacket and your, heavy this and mittens that and blah, 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 blah. And so what the race was trying to do is make sure that you had all the right gear for the conditions, but they were leaving it up to the athletes to really decide how to get from place to place.
Okay.
And I appreciate that as a coach and an athlete. I mean, you always want to enable the athletes, and they had great, as good as you could be in that area, weather reports every time you would check into the aid station. So you could kind of look at the area that you're in, and there's a weather report specific for that area for like the next 12 or 24 hours. So you go in and look and say, okay, I'm going to need this and this, and I'm going to take it out of my yellow bag, and I'm going to put everything else back in the yellow bag, and then kind of be on your way. So anyway, but I guess to your like original question, like I honestly don't think it was anything like out of the ordinary. I mean, I had a normal long sleeve top, gloves, few hats, down jacket, some Catula type micro spikes, which I didn't end up using.
I was going to ask, did the crampons come into play?
Well, there was about an hour that I really wish I had them. Right out of the gate, the first col that we went up, it was full on winter, like snow and grapple coming down. It's probably about, maybe 2.5 or 3 inches that kind of laid down on the course and had compressed into ice after everybody had trampled on it. So that, whether or not those are, worth hauling around for 10 hours to use them for one, that's a judgment call. But I could definitely see why that they're on the required gear list, and it's just completely dependent upon the weather. So I didn't end up using my micro spikes. I didn't end up using my down jacket, but everything else in the required kit outside of like the medical card, I ended up using it at one point or another. Even my phone, which had the map on it, I had to pull out a couple times just to double check some things. But yeah, I ended up using a lot of gear. And even Liz, my wife, you mentioned, who was crewing for me, I even had her wash some of my clothes at some point and bring them back, because you're just, pouring through gear, so quickly, especially if you get into a spot of rain or anything like that. Like, it's really, really easy to chew through a lot of gear.
And how often did you have access to crew? Like, how often did you end up actually seeing Liz in total throughout the race?
So I did it. I just told her every 50K. So every life base, which ends up being anywhere between like 8 and 16 hours or something like that for me. I had her meet me there. You're allowed to go to any aid station, but I don't want my friggin' wife driving around, at 3 a.m. after she's been up for 4 days trying to find some obscure mountain hut in the middle of nowhere. So I just took the really simple approach and said, meet me here, 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 and here, and then the rest of the time, go sleep, go do tourist things, go have fun, and that way I've got peace of mind that that she's safe and having a good time, and not just flying all the way over to Italy to be miserable for 4 days while I play around in the mountains. It just made the whole thing a whole lot better.
And how competitive did you allow yourself to get, or were you ever? I mean, I remember following the tracking, and it seemed like you were running somewhere between, I would say, like maybe 15th and like 20 something place. Yeah. So you were definitely up there, and there were moments where I was like, holy shit, Koop is like in the top 15 or top 12 or whatever it was. Talk about that aspect, because to kind of reconcile being competitive with just can I fucking do this kind of thing. I'm really interested in that mentality.
Yeah, I could give a shit less like what place I was in at any one point in time. I honestly was completely resolved to getting around the loop, no matter what it took, no matter how long it took me. I took my sweet time when I needed to take my sweet time, and I pressed on a few points, just because the situation kind of dictated it, right? I wanted to get out of some weather, or I just wanted to get into an aid station and eat some more pizza or something like that. But and I pushed myself really hard. I wanted to do that, but in terms of being competitive with the rest of the field, I honestly couldn't have cared less the entire time. People would tell me where I was in the field, and I'd just be like, whatever, thank you, but that's not going to affect what I'm doing.
Yeah, your fitness just was your fitness, and your day was your day, and
you got what you got. Yeah, but I think in something like that, the first time you go out, like, even once again, I'm not an elite athlete, so I don't really have this makeup anyway, but the first time you go out in something like that, like, there's a little bit of the lay of the land you have to get. And for an event like that, the learning curve is immense. Like, from year 1 to year 2, and you look at the people who have won that race and done really well, or done it for a few years, like year 1 and year 2, they improve by like 10 hours, just because they kind of learn like the ins and outs of what it means to do something that big. So, but anyway, my thought process the whole time was just get around the loop in one piece, play defense the whole, I was going to say the whole day, but play defense the whole time, and live to tell the tale.
What about people? So obviously I'm sure you're just get caught up in certain trains of people, or maybe one specific person. I think I may have seen at some points where you were actually like neck and neck with Darcy Picu. Is that right?
Yeah. So, she was ahead of me for a long time, and then I passed her in an aid station. I didn't actually see her, so we never saw each other the whole race. But I would see like her crew, and I would see like other people, and I'd ask where she was, and I had the sense that she was pretty close to me as well, but we never ended up seeing each other. I did see a lot of so I mentioned earlier, there's a number of different races going on. There's this 130K race that uses the last 130K of the Tour de Geants course, and I kept seeing the same people like for the whole back half of the race. And so it was a really neat like camaraderie point, because they realized how long we've been going, and we realized how long they've been going. And for me, I'm in, the like probably the middle of that race, that 130K race. And as you know, right, being going out to a lot of races, the middle of the pack has a completely different attitude than the front of the pack, or sometimes even the back of the pack. So like that was just like really refreshing to like be around all of those people at the same time. It was it was a really, really cool feature of the race.
Do you have any specific memorable miles that you shared with there's a shit ton of international athletes, and
yeah,
so I don't know how heavy the conversations got, but any particular interactions that come to mind when I ask you about?
I wish I could remember these guys' name, but I came into the very first place where I was going to sleep, which is it's called Refugio Coda, and I think it's like 140K into the race. Hold on. Coda.
So the people who are not seeing the video part of this, Koop actually looks like an offensive coordinator right now. He has a big laminate sheet trying to figure out which play to dial up next with his headset on.
So Refugio Coda is like 170K into the whole thing. And so I figured I'd sleep there the first time. Mm-hmm. And I'd done that piece in training, so I kind of knew where it was. And
how much time are we talking about, by the way, with the 170K?
So the race starts at noon on Sunday. So I went through the whole first night without sleep, and this was probably 6 it was probably 10 p.m. the next night. So 36-ish hours, right? 36 hours. So anyway, I decided that I was going to sleep there, and I get into this place, and it's if you've ever been to Refugio, it's just almost like a cabin, up on this ridge line. It's got a little entryway and a bunk area in the back, and there's no English once you leave the cities, right? So I think that's important for this story. There's a lot of English in the cities itself, so you can get around pretty easily. But once you leave the cities, and especially at these refugios, there's hardly any English at all. And so I get into this refugio, and I ask the guy who looked like he was in charge, like, I showed him like the international sign for sleep, put my hands together in the prayer sign, and put my side of my head on the back of my hand. And so he took me back to this bunk room, and they have this system where you're only allowed to stay at these refugios for 2 hours max. And so he writes my bib number down on this chart that indicates exactly where I was sitting, or where I was going to sleep. And he put me on the very first bunk that you would see when the door opened. And the door basically opened into the bunk that I had.
Give me a square footage, an idea of the size of this room.
Yeah, the size of this room is probably like 30 feet by 30 feet. And it had maybe like 10 or 12 bunks in it or something like that.
Okay.
All kind of just a few feet off the floor. And so the first thing I thought was, I was like, oh, I must be the first person to sleep here, right? Because he's putting me in the very first one. And so I start getting my stuff ready to like go to sleep. I had some headphones that I would use for like white noise and stuff like that. And I just noticed that there are other people that have already been here that are sleeping, but they're like tucked away in the corner, like away from all the light and way away from this door that I had just come in. And I'm like, oh man, that's weird. So anyway, I lay down, I'm trying to go to sleep, and it was terrible. Like, cause this door that was right next to me would open up and hit the foot of my bunk every time somebody would come in. And so I stay there for a couple hours. I get up at the same time as these two guys from Spain who were running together got up, and we all left the aid station together, and I could speak enough broken Spanish and they could speak enough broken English to where we could kind of communicate. And what we figured out over the course of like the next hour of like, hiking down the trail all together is that they were putting all of the Italians that came in the corners of this room away from all the light and all of the sound. And they were putting everybody who couldn't speak Italian right next to the door. They put these two Spanish guys like basically opposite where I was. So if I was getting the door hitting my bunk, they were getting the light flooded into their bunks.
Right.
But it took us like an hour to like actually figure all this out because, you know, there were people still coming in the entire time, but they kept getting shoved into the back of this whole room where it was like nice and dark and quiet and cold. And they put anybody who didn't speak Italian like in the shit areas basically. So anyway, that just, and I'm not saying that to like, you know, this sucks. It's just part of the culture and how they want to run it. You know, I actually kind of got a chuckle out of it after we had pieced it all together. And that happened maybe 3 more times.
Could it be
very, very distinctly? Very distinct.
Well, freaking A, you learn the language, Coop.
Yeah,
you have an entire year if you want to do it again.
I was out there for
Give me the corner of the refugio, you know?
Exactly.
Any other stories of people that you shared miles with? Any potentially like harrowing encounters of somebody getting too cold or being a zombie on the trails, anything like that?
Well, I had about towards the end of the race, I had like probably about a 5 or 6 hour period where I just kept like passing out on my feet. And I was actually feeling like really, really, really good before that. And for whatever reason, like just shit hit the fan. And
is that like one of those phenomenons where you start getting like Bambi legs, you know, once you see the finish line?
Yeah, I don't know. Well, I wasn't close to the finish line.
Well, I mean, like still a long way comparatively away. Speaking, like 5 hours might as well be the finish line shoot.
It's still a long way away though at that point. Like you can't count your chickens. So I, you know, the run of show would be I'd get up, I'd go like 30 meters down the trail, and then I'd find myself curled up on the side of the trail. I had no idea how I would get there. And I'd kind of come to my senses. I'd get up again, I'd go 20 or 30 meters, and I'd pass out on my feet again. And, you know, every once in a while, somebody would like poke me with their sticks as they came by. And luckily there's this Australian kid, I can't remember his name either, but he and I were going back and forth a lot. He was in the 130K race that I was talking about earlier as well. He checked in on me one time. He's like, "Hey dude, are you okay?" I'm like, "Yeah, whatever." So anyway, that happened for like 5 or 6 hours, but I didn't realize it at the time. So towards the very end of that whole ordeal, you know, the sun has already come up and things like that. And I'm sitting on the side of the trail, just trying to get my shit together. And I look down the valley from where I came, and I'm like, oh, I remember being there, because there's this bridge that we went underneath. Like, I remember being there, and it was only like 3K away. So I remember being there, and it was 2 a.m. And now it's 8 a.m, and I've only gone 3 kilometers. Like, what just happened? Like, I just went 3 kilometers in 5 or 6 hours. Like that, how did that even happen? And so gradually the whole thing started getting pieced together, and I had one of those moments where it's like, I don't know if I'm going to finish. Like, if I go 3K every 6 hours, I'm just going to time out.
What's the timeout?
So,
what's the cutoff time?
Oh, cutoff time is like, it's like 120 hours, I think.
Okay.
But I could do the math to figure out that I would be in danger of, like, you know, I finished on a Wednesday, right?
Yeah.
I ended up finishing on a Wednesday, that I would finish on Friday. Like, that's kind of the scenario that was playing out in my head. Like, it's going to take me an extra 2 days to go this extra, or to do this last 30 kilometers. And so I get into the next aid station, and there was this, the Alpine guide or whatever who was running it looked and sounded exactly like one of my early coaching mentors, who's this really distinctive person. His name's JT Kearney. He's this huge person. He was an Olympic level kayaker in the 80s, and since became a really renowned physiologist at the Olympic Training Center. But he looked and sounded exactly like this person who had a really informative impact on my coaching career, except that he spoke no English and only spoke Italian. And
except for that minor detail, yeah.
Minor detail. And he said something profound to me in Italian that made an impact, and somehow I got my shit together and ended up finishing the race in actually pretty good shape. So anyway, it was just one of those weird.
Well, you're not going to share what he said?
No, he just looked at me and he said something in Italian, and, you know, it was probably like, "You'll be okay," or
Or you got a
everybody looks
little
like,
you got a little piece of Nutella on your cheek.
yeah, something,
Yeah.
yeah, something like that. Yeah. I took it as being profound, at least.
Yeah.
It did. So anyway, I kind of like, it was just a weird, it was just a weird 6-ish hours, right? Where I go from kind of uncontrollably like passing out time after time after time after time to meeting this person that was like a ghost had, like, risen out of the ashes or something like that, and then they kind of able to finish the race. And up the last climb, I posted this on Instagram, it kind of culminated like right there, all in kind of quick succession. I got super emotional at the top of it, and normally most people would probably describe me as fairly stoic, but got like super emotional at the top of this climb, like, okay, now I just have to descend like 20K, I just have to do 20 more kilometers. But it was just anyway, that whole period was just really cool, just because it had the range of everything.
Yeah. And it's just a culmination of everything that you freaking underwent for, like I said, almost 100 hours. Can you send me that video clip, by the way? I want to, for the people out there, I want to inject the audio and the video into this. So what did the finish feel like after all this? And again, 100 hours of just relentless forward motion. Like, how do you put a button on this entirety of this like bizarre, strange experience where you're sleeping for a couple of hours, moving forward, going up these steep climbs, weather changing, meeting up with Liz, like for 90 plus hours? Like, what did that feel like at the finish line? Is it relief? Is it something more profound that you felt up before you descended?
I was just really grateful, like for the whole thing, not just to be able to stop running for a while, right? But I was just like grateful for the whole process, because it all, as I mentioned, that why that transformed during the training process, it all really came together. Like, I figured it out. It made sense. I was really grateful that I had the experience that I had. I had some times where I was, running really great, made really good decisions. I felt awesome. And then I had times where, I'm moving 500 meters an hour, on really easy terrain. By the way, that section of the course was probably some of the easiest running that there should have been. And so if anything, I was just really grateful. My wife was at the finish line. My parents were they were there as well. They just happened to be taking a vacation in Italy, and just as the timing worked out, they drove from Milan and made it into Courmayeur like an hour before I finished, just almost randomly. And so to have it all kind of come together like that, I was just really grateful for the whole experience, inclusive of the race and the training and everything else that went into it.
Okay, I have a couple of questions from Patreon supporter Mark. He was curious. I know we covered a large part of this, but in case there were something specific that you wanted to answer, he was curious to hear about the tough physical, we're talking like legs, knees, and feet aspect of the journey. Saw that he struggled with sleep and emotion, and in relation to how did he feel his training worked to prep him, and assuming he felt pain, train more, or just part of something that was just that epic.
I honestly, like, physically, I held up really well. I can't complain one bit about.
Do you attribute that to the volume that you did and just getting yourself ready for something like this?
Yeah, I once again, I did a lot. I did way more than I've ever, done in my life. So it's definitely like as physically prepared as I could have been. I had virtually no blisters, no joint soreness or anything like that, no swelling. I didn't have any nutrition issues at all. And I chalked that up to training as well. Because as I mentioned, right, I'm going up to the top of Pikes Peak and having pizza. Like, I trained that, pretty diligently.
Yeah. On our last podcast, you really emphasized getting like the caloric intake that you would during the course of a race to train your gut as well. Yeah,
I did that. And I mean, Liz can profess to this. I was eating a lot and just processing all of it. I was actually, that was probably the thing that was the most, that went the best. was just how much I was able to eat during the course of everything, and how once again, I had no stomach issues at all. And once again, I don't have a, bulletproof stomach like a lot of people tend to have. I have had, stomach issues in races. So for whatever reason, I figured that piece of it out. But from a physical standpoint, joints, knees, muscles, lungs, and stuff like that, it's just the volume of training kind of did everything. It's just, I can't really say enough about that. I definitely did enough.
Secondly, how would you evaluate the weight of the mental and emotional toll or effort versus the physical?
So that's huge. And I actually took a lot of steps during the training process to kind of like shore that piece of it up, just to, make sure that I was confident and make sure that, I'd have my head on straight. And that's why I mentioned the last couple runs that I actually did on the course. I did not care that much about the physical part of the physical part of it, but the confidence that it gave me, and just the fact that I could like conceptualize getting from place to place actually had the most impact. So just like I have my athletes do, I just reviewed my training, gave me a lot of confidence. This is, I've done enough. I'm not going to get greedy with anything like that. All of that made a huge impact, because there was never one instance where I was doubting my physical capability of being able to complete the race, save for in the very beginning when I had this really weird, like it almost felt like a calf strain for a few hours. Like I thought it was going to just be a showstopper, like just some weird, I don't know whether I caught it during a fall or something like that or what, but
how early on are we talking?
30K in the race.
Wow.
Yeah,
okay.
It was really weird. I was just running on this like flat road out of an aid station, and it's like somebody like shot my calf with a BB gun or something like that. And I spent like 4 or 5 hours like slowing down and kind of running around it, and I stretched it a few times, and I stopped to like massage it out a few times just to see if it would, do anything. And for whatever reason, just from one step to the next, miraculously it went away. But aside from that, like relatively small hiccup, like I didn't have any real physical issues to contend with, other than just the duration of the race being hard, right? It's not like it was easy. Don't want anybody to get that impression. Like it's still hard, but I never like doubted like my physical capabilities of being able to make it to the finish line, because everything was going relatively well.
So there was no real moment of the enormity of the task at hand that hit you when you're so fatigued and tired, and then you're like, oh shit, I still have 150 miles to go.
Yeah,
100 miles to go.
I conscientiously never thought about that once. So I had every aid station, or not every aid station, but every 50K when I saw Liz, I had a new like little note card that just had the major parts of the course on it, whether it was a top of a climb or an aid station or the bottom of the descent or something like that. But it would only show like the next 50K in front of me. And then when I would look at it, I would literally just look at the next step. So, okay, the next piece is 5K and I go up 1,000 meters or something like that, right? Okay, the next thing is 8K and I go down 800 meters. Like I would just literally just kind of like take it step by step, because I couldn't memorize the whole thing. I mean, you can see this. It's like, 150 lines. I'm not that smart to begin with, and no way could I, memorize this. And, after 3 or 4 days of, not having any sleep and running around. And so I would just literally just kind of, and I never thought about what came next or whatever, so much so that like sometimes like there were a lot of points where I was like, I don't know whether I'm 200K into this race or 100K into this race. Like I kind of just lost the reality of how long I had run or how much I need to go, because I just cared about what was in front of me.
So don't get the arm tattoo for this race. I mean, probably couldn't fit on one arm.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I definitely would not do that.
Let's talk about my favorite topic, food. You mentioned pizza. What else was in the arsenal of fueling you throughout this entire journey?
Oh man, what wasn't in the arsenal? So the real food that I had was pizza and French fries. That was like every 50K when I could see Liz. She'd bring me pizza and French fries, and I'd usually just make like a pizza and French fry sandwich and just kind of like bite into it, which was awesome. A lot of Nutella sandwiches, so just Nutella and white bread. I made my rice balls. I had, two of those every 50 kilometers pretty much. So bacon, eggs, cheese, and rice all in like a little sandwich bag.
Yeah, we talked about this in the first podcast to the people who are curious about Koop's balls.
Yes, everybody's curious about that apparently. So I had that at real, those for real food. And then every once in a while I'd have like, a candy bar that I'd buy at one of the refugios, or what else did I have? Maybe I had some chips and polenta every so often, and then maybe some soup. And then I still had engineered food as well. I mean, I still had, gels, and I use Pro Bar Bolts a lot, and, just some electrolyte drink mix and things like that. So I just kind of rotated between those like every other feeding, essentially. Like half the feedings would be engineered food and the other half would be kind of real food, just whatever I had on me.
So let's talk about recovery in the wake of all this. How's that been going? Are you being diligent and making sure you can distinguish between athlete Koop and coach Koop, and doing exactly what coach Koop would prescribe to any of his athletes?
Oh man, I'm in no hurry to do anything. One of my training buddies tried to hit me up for like a 50K run this weekend. I was like, no. Like I have no, like, are you kidding me? I have no. Okay, let's go 20K. No, like I don't want to go run with you. I just want to like go run with my dog and chill out. I in the 2 days after the race, I was pretty bad at taking care of myself. And it's
how so?
Well, I was playing tour guide for my parents and my wife. I'd been to the area a lot, and so I kind of knew where to take them. And so we did the tourist things, right? We went up the Mont Blanc Skyway and over to Guimaudy and back. And, I took Liz around to a couple other places in Courmayeur, and just on my feet the whole time. And so my feet and my knees just swole up like, just like big balloons. I could barely put my shoes on and things like that. So I did not, and intentionally, I did not really take care of myself in those next couple of days, but I don't care. I don't have anything else on the calendar. I'm not doing anything else soon. Since then, I took like a week, like maybe, if I'm being honest, 2 weeks, and I ate everything in sight. Like anything I could get my hands on, I was eating just all the time. It was getting kind of gross for a while. Like I was just eating so much and eating everything, like really crappy food, like copious amounts of really good food, like you name it. And so since then I've kind of like toned that down. Now we're like 3 weeks out, and I'm definitely not 100%. Like I'm running, I ran 20K today, 20 something K today, but I'm in no hurry to do anything. I still have some stiff achy joints and stuff like that, but it's nothing to write home about.
Talk about Liz throughout this entire process. I mean, if she doesn't win Wife of the Year for 2019, she should be up there. Mm-hmm. Dealing with the training leading into the race when you're gone for 30 to 40 hours a week at your peak training, to driving around the entire Aosta Valley to make sure you can have your pizza and French fry sandwiches and feed you your rice balls. By the way, how many rice balls did you pre-make before this race?
I made like 16 of them beforehand, and I think I had all of them but like one or two.
Okay. So talk about Liz throughout this whole process.
Well, I mean, she doesn't just get Wife of the Year in 2019. She gets Wife of the Year every year since we've been married. She knows she married a coach and a runner, right? And I proposed to her at the finish line of the Leadville Trail 100, for God's sake. She has a little bit of a sense of ultimately what she's gotten into, but obviously very supportive. Like anything that I needed to do from a training perspective or whatever, like, yep, go do what you need to do. You need to go to Italy early, great, I'll take care of the dogs and hold things down here. You need to go over to Leadville and train on the mountains there and, figure this out. Great. Go ahead and do it. And she, she's got her own stuff going on. I mean, she did the Ute, right? I paced her, during the Ute 100 and, she's as authentic as it gets too. So she understands like what it takes to train for these things. So as always, just incredibly supportive. I couldn't ask for a better partner in this whole deal.
All right. Anything, last words to say about TDG that we did not cover that you want to get out there?
Yeah, it's just a wonderful race. Like if you're considering doing it, like don't be scared about, the distance or the duration or anything like that. Just like, just do it. I mean, it's a really, really great race and a great location. And the organization is fantastic. The area is fantastic. Yeah. And they do give you enough time to finish. Yeah. If you're committed, or Rock Horton, right, who's a hard rock legend, was out there. He took almost every bit every bit of the allowance that he had to finish that race, and he loved every second of it. He was definitely happy to be done when it was all said and done, but he did it the right way. I mean, yeah. He knew that he was going to take his time around the course and sleep when he needed to and stuff like that. So anyway, I just tell people if they're thinking about biting off something that big, like if it's gnawing at you enough to be interesting, like just jump in and you'll figure it out. Right. I mean, I'm kind of a case in point of that. Right. I didn't know how to I didn't know I was going to figure it out when I first got into it, but I ended up doing it by, just put my head down in training, and, it ultimately all came together. So don't be afraid. And it's just a really neat race.
I will say that's the only way. And I probably had this conversation with like somebody like Courtney too in the past, where that's the only way I can probably put my head around it, is that on one hand, especially with the advent of more and more like what's next, right? The 200-mile races that are popping up seemingly everywhere now, especially with Candace at the helm. The only way I could like reconcile it in my brain is to almost treat this as like a through hike. Because 200 miles sounds daunting, but you're talking to somebody who's also super interested in doing something like the JMT, which is 200 plus miles in beautiful high alpine terrain. So, there's probably a middle ground there somewhere where they overlap, where you can kind of, if you treat it like a long extended adventure, or like, circumnavigating Tahoe. Yeah. I can start to reconcile it in my brain.
Yeah, very, very fortunately, I've coached a number of adventure racers just in my career, and having had gone through like expedition, like the adventure racers, and having gone through that and what they go through in terms of having to time things out, and just like the psychology that they use day to day was actually really beneficial. And I used a lot more of that during this event than I would during a normal running event, just from how to wrap your head around it and the psychology piece of it. Ultra running is just one of those cool things, and especially when you get into the longer distances, where no matter how much you prepare for it, there's way more unknown than there is known.
Yeah, I agree.
You do a marathon and you'll work yourself up to 15 or 18 mile, long run or something like that. That's not that much unknown. Like, with all due respect to marathoners, it's great. It's a great sport. It's a great distance, but for the run-of-the-mill marathoner that's doing their first one, they're going to have as much unknown as they do in a normal training run, right? So they can kind of conceptualize what it is to run those last 6 or 8 miles or whatever. Unless you've done a lot of 100-mile races or a lot of, ultra marathons, that's not the case. Like, you're going to get into a 50-mile or 100K or whatever, and your longest training run might be like a fourth of the actual distance, right? Or a third of the actual distance. And so it's this really interesting proposition where you just gotta like accept the unknown as part of the whole race.
I'm gonna make the most awkward segue here, but when you said earlier, just do it, reminded me of something a little more topical, which I try not to do too much in this podcast, but One of the things I love about you is that you don't shy away from voicing your opinion on certain topics, and I think you probably know where I'm going with this. Like I said, it's October 5th right now, and right now the big news, and not just well, I mean, I would put it on the umbrella of endurance running. What everyone's talking about is what's going on with the Nike Oregon project and Alberto Salazar in particular. Thoughts, man? I'm gonna leave it as general and as vague as that. But what has your reaction been to the news that's been out there regarding Alzal?
Well, I mean, this has been coming down the pipe for a long time. So, I don't think anybody who's been watching it is really all that surprised. They're just more relieved that there's some sort of, this is going to sound oxymoronic, there's some initial finality to it, right? Because Alberto's going to appeal the decision, and that's going to last another couple of years maybe. But it's been just dragging on for such a long time, and now that you saw it, it was kind of made a decision. Okay, here are the infractions, and here's what the sanction is going to be. Just having that weight lifted, I think it's a big moment for track and field. But anybody on the inside will just tell you they've just been, that it's not anything new, right? That anybody's learned. So I think it's a good step forward for the sport to kind of clear this stuff. It is one very small step forward in a sport that not only on the doping side of things, but in other areas is just very unfortunately just absolutely riddled with corruption and conflicts of interest. I mean, you just look at Doha, the World Championships that are going right now. It's just being a total shit show from top to bottom, from the lack of spectators in the stands to how the whole thing unfolded with all the briberies and things like that are going on. So this is a positive step forward to hopefully we can kind of finally put it in the rearview mirror. I honestly think that as a coach, one of the more unfortunate things about this that's not getting talked about a whole lot is the athletes are still competing their asses off. Like if we just look at the women's 1500 meter final, right, which happened right now, there was an American record set. Like there's some really good American performances, top to bottom. And when you look at the media that's been transpiring throughout the course of the World Championships, mind you, it's so disproportionately placed on this, big black eye that the sport has on it, and it's doing so to the detriments of the athletes that are going out there and still competing their butts off and having good races. If you just look at the way that they're treated, the Americans are particularly subject to this, obviously, but if you just look at the way that they're treated in the mixed zone, 75% of the questions that they get asked in the mixed media zone is about this Alberto case, and 25% is about the race that they just ran. Like that shouldn't be the case. Like we should be focusing on the performances and the athletes and kind of holding just holding things to a little bit of a higher standard, just because there still is a competition going on, right? I think we'd be mindful to continue to remember that they're already having to face enough nonsense with just the venue itself and the lack of attendance and things like that. This is just one more thing that just detracts from it. And that, like I said, I just think that's really unfortunate.
Well, that's what I thought I found so classy about Kara's response to all of this is that, I kind of like tongue in cheek inquired about like, hey, Kara, what's going on? What's new? Via Twitter. And I'm sure she's inundated or tagged in a bunch of tweets and like wanting to hear her opinions, because she is one of the early whistleblowers who really put herself out there, formerly working under Salazar until 2011. And she said, hey, I'll say my piece, but not until after the World Championships. The focus should be on the athletes first and foremost.
Yep. And that's the way that I would expect nothing less of her. That's the way athletes should take it. She should know that as an athlete, right? What it's like to have that spotlight to track the one time every 2 or 4 years, right? That you get a little bit of notoriety. Having it take away at this point is actually quite tragic. So I would expect nothing less of her, because she knows, right? I mean, she's been on the world stage before at the highest
Yeah.
level, and knows what that means.
But
So
man, fair or not, it's just kind of like a microcosm of like the state of the world these days. It's like whatever generates clicks, whatever generates views, and whatever keeps that buzz going, or keeps the interest going, is what seems to make the headlines.
yeah, and unfortunately, USADA's in the position where they've got to play that game. I mean, just look at the timing of all of this, right? Which is not coincidental at all. They could hold the timing until after the World Championships. That would be a very easy thing to do, or they could have done it weeks in advance.
Wait, elaborate on that. What are you talking about?
Yeah, so they released this sanction and this ban in the middle of the World Championships,
Right.
and there's no reason other than to generate more clicks and more attention for the fact that they are catching dopers to release it at this time.
Oh,
They could have done it earlier. They could have done it later. And I think with USADA's right down the street from me. I have a lot of respect for those guys. They work extremely hard and extremely diligently at what they do. Most people don't realize how much time and effort and everything else goes into these things, and how much they are just a business just like anybody else, right? I mean, they've got budget constraints and people constraints and priorities to prioritize and things like that. People think that they have this unlimited budget and resources to throw at problems, and they do not. I mean, they've got to manage things just like any other small business has to manage things. And so I have a lot of respect for them, but very unfortunately so, they're in this position where they also have to consider the PR that goes around the things that they are doing. And some of that is the timing of the releases, who they're actually targeting, right? That's a really unfortunate. Not a lot of people think about this, right? I'll use an example for an athlete that's not in running, that is retired, to like depersonalize a little bit. They'll target Michael Phelps, right? The most prolific Olympic champion ever. They'll target him more simply to say, we tested Michael Phelps 30 times this year or something like that. There is absolutely a PR angle to how much they test certain athletes. And so I just use that as a dialogue to say it's really unfortunate, but I understand that has to be part of the makeup of what an anti-doping association has to do. The other piece that I'll say with that, because there's some legit shade being thrown at USADA, as there always is during these times. They hold themselves and operate at a higher standard than any other nationally governed anti-doping association. Even UK anti-doping, you can run down the list. They're way up here, and all those other anti-doping organizations are not even close, and they still try to do a good job. Don't get me wrong. A lot of those nationally run anti-doping associations they're doing the best they can, but in terms of the standards that USADA holds themselves to, it is light years above and beyond what else is out there. And I that shouldn't be lost in this whole conversation when they get criticized, because they really are the standard bearer in that entire complex.
So what happens to, going back to Alberto for a second, what happens to his athletes?
Oh gosh.
I mean, we have the Olympic marathon trials coming up in a few short months. So, when it comes to Galen and Mo and all those guys, like what's next?
Yeah, it's when you think about it, it's really weird, right? So you have this coach that was accused of doping violations, but not doping his athletes. Right. So there's a very clear distinction there. You can have a doping violation and not actually dope your athletes, right? In this coach's case, what they do is first they have to manage the media storm, right? Which I could very easily see a lot of his athletes, even the ones that decide to split, and that's another conversation, right? Just not competing. And we've already seen that transpire during the course of this investigation, where sometimes athletes are lined up for a race and there's just so much heat on Alberto that they just can't handle it. So that's the first thing, is they've got to manage the media storm around it. The races have to decide how they're going to manage it as well. And most of them, I can't imagine a race is going to take the stance of, well, your coach is serving a violation, so now you have to serve the violation as well. I don't think anybody's going to take that stance, although there are calls for it right now. But I do think that there are other shoes to drop. And I'm not the only person that thinks this, right? Mm-hmm. But there are going to be other shoes to drop in this whole saga. And it's just going to take time. I mean, this whole, the investigation to get like the head of the snake, so to speak, right, took 4 years. It's going to take even longer to, weed the rest of this out. So it puts the athletes in a really tough position, because you can say what you want to about should they even be with that organization or not, right? That's another conversation. But they're in that organization now, and they're going to have to make a choice whether to stick it out or whether they're going to, or whether they're going to kind of jump ship. And that's going to be all over the board, because some of them have, don't have any communication with them, and have had no communication with them since they joined the program, right? Because they've got another coach that's kind of managing it. So it's just really weird for the athletes, just because their level of, and I think the testimony will start to tease this out, their level of, knowledge and involvement in any of this is going to range from, or it's going to range from they receive a violation themselves, right? They have to serve a sanction themselves, to nothing, right? I mean, they don't know, and they're not investigated at all. So yeah, we'll just have to wait to see how that plays out.
And to say nothing about Nike's involvement in all of this. I don't know if you read the emails between Mark Parker, the CEO, and Dr. Jeffrey Brown out of Houston. It's, on one hand, if the explanation, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to get too in the weeds of all this, but it'll be interesting to. He clearly knows something. Whether the excuse justifies or explains his inquiry and his back and forth with the doctor, which kind of does. I don't know. It makes sense. If there's people kind of gunning for their athletes and want to set off tests, and what the bare minimum amount of the testosterone cream, whatever it's called, I'd want to be in the know about that too. But I don't know, man. It's just, the implications could be huge if in fact this is just like the tip of the iceberg, and shit's going down.
Yeah, their approach on it, it shouldn't be surprising, right? Because that's been their pattern of approach. You can go back to Lance and other track and field athletes that they've had. They wait until all of the dust is settled, right? Until absolutely every last shred of appeal and things like that is kind of gone down to really really make any moves. So we'll just see how it pans out. I mean, they get a lot of arrows slung at them.
They did say they're standing behind Alberto, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, they're going to stand behind, and that shouldn't surprise anybody. I mean, they're going to stand by him until the appeals process has kind of worked its way out. I wouldn't expect it anything less, because that's their pattern, right? I mean, you even look at athletes that they've had underneath their umbrella that have had doping sanctions, like they kind of stick with them until the very last possible minute, and then once it's inevitable, and once it cuts into their profits too much, right, they'll jettison them at that point. But it'll just once again, unfortunately, it's just going to take time to kind of weed out. I think everybody would agree that if we could just wave a magic wand and have the solutions all be presented tomorrow, that would be better for track and field. But that's not going to happen. This is going to continue to drag out for another few years, and we're going to still talk about. I'm going to come on your podcast for the 10th time, and this will still be some sort of issue at that point in time.
Don't flatter yourself, buddy. I'm going to look at the bottom line. If I don't see an uptick in downloads, this could be third and done.
There you go.
All right, let's end things on. Actually, no. I have one more doping questions as it pertains to our sport, ultra running. What do you think? How rampant? How like, do you think there's a dearth of it, that people are as pure as they seem? I don't know. Like, what are your thoughts on doping and ultra running in general?
Well, it's going on. I don't think it's nearly as prevalent as it is in, the major sports that we watch, even if you take that into the league sports, right? Football, basketball, baseball, and then the big time Olympic sports like swimming and track and field. Far more prevalent in those sports than it is in ultra running. But I don't think that ultra running is this like angelic, sport with a halo over it where nobody's cheating at all. I mean, you even see people cheat, right? People get caught cheating, right?
Right.
Not in a doping sense, but cutting courses and receiving aid at aid stations and stuff like that. People are going to
still boggles the fucking mind.
I know. So it's definitely happening, but it's I don't think it's an issue. Now that being said, that is not a static proposition, and I've lobbied for this for years to try to get some sort of governing body, rule system, doping control, things like that in place for ultra running, because it could very easily end up just like cycling, just like track and field, where years go by and we think that everything's good because, we've got this halo over our head and nobody's cheating. That can change. And
especially with more money gets injected into the sport, the popularity continues the way it has been.
And my point with that is if you don't take proactive steps to cut it off before it becomes a problem, you're always playing catch up, and it's not a game of catch up that you'll likely ever win. So I do think that race organizers and athletes and brands need to be cognizant of that and do things both collectively and in their little individual groups that continue to keep drugs out of the sport. And people are trying to do that, but very unfortunately, there's no one organizing body that's going to set the standard of it, right? That's going to set the standard for it right now. And that actually could become a big issue, 5 or 6 years down the line, if that continues to be the case, where there's nobody kind of like calling the shots for what the rules should be, how we're going to do this, how we're going to do that. Like, that can ultimately lead to a lot of chaos.
All right. Now we're going to move on. A few more speed round questions, and then I'll let you go, Koop. Tell me about the strangest or most bizarre, unusual aid station food that you saw, going back to TDS.
The strangest one. I didn't see anything super strange. I mean, I did eat I came into this one aid station, and there was this gigantic, like 50-gallon drum of polenta that this guy was making, and he was stirring it around with like what looked like an oar. It's just like this big wooden stick, and he was serving it from it as well. He'd like lift it, it was like really sticky. So he'd lift this oar out of this big, huge pot and like plop it onto a bowl. And so I had that, and I mixed some salt and vinegar chips in it. So that in the world of ultra running, that's really not that bizarre, but that's really the most bizarre thing that I personally encountered, or I really even saw. I didn't see anything like really too like out of whack there.
What's the verdict, by the way, on the polenta and
awesome, unbelievable? Yeah, I mean, this is like $230K into the whole thing, so everything cardboard looks good at that point. So.
One last question about TDG was hallucinations. Did you have any?
I didn't have any. I kind of expected to, because that's one of the things with these longer races. You start to have these epic hallucinations. There's a really good YouTube video that Nicodemus Holland, who's done the race a few times, put together a few years, where he asks people about their hallucinations during the award ceremony. It's hilarious. They've got go check it out. It's got like characters and scenes and plot lines, and they're just stuff that you just can't make up. It's not like I saw a bear in a tree and it was really a rock or something like that. Like it very, very, very well played out hallucinations. But I did not have any of those. I just passed out. Like, I didn't see anything. I just saw the friggin' ground in front of me. That's all. That was the extent of everything.
I do believe that is the story behind this T-shirt.
I think so. That's Courtney's t-shirt, the leopard
Yeah,
in the
in the
hammock
hammock.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If Uroi voting were to end today in America specifically, tell me number one on the men and the women's side for you today.
For Ultra Runner of the Year?
Ultra Runner of the Year.
Man,
yeah.
I don't touch that with a 9-foot pole.
What?
Yeah, no, here's the deal.
Wait, do you have a vote?
Yeah, no. So John Manager asked me to vote last year. And
Oh, wait,
no.
you know what? Yeah, I know
no.
this about you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Conflict of interest and that bullshit.
I don't get into it, to be honest with you. I'll if I'm having a couple beers with people, I'll opine on, what I really think. But
what about performances? Any performance that stand out for the men and women's side? Can you answer that?
Well, certainly Jim Walmsley's Western States run, right, was quite impressive. As was Jarrett's, by the way. Like
I know
that doesn't get near enough credit because fair conditions, right? I mean, they both ran fantastic races. I think the race, speaking of Western States, between
Claire Gallagher and Brittany Peterson.
Claire and Brittany at the end, and I was very lucky that I got to witness a small piece of that at the Pointed Rocks aid station. I just think that from a performance standpoint, we need more of that. Like ultra running needs absolutely everything that it can get from that standpoint. Tight race, they're both going for it at the very end. I saw Claire take the whole shot onto the single track like a friggin' mountain biker at the beginning of a race. It was awesome. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe that just happened. This is 94 miles into a race. So certainly that stands out as as just an absolutely fantastic performance. By
the way, while we're on this, I just want to clarify that there was a bit of blowback by Koop's critique of UTMB on the women's side, namely, and I just want to say I don't think we were saying, or at least I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think there was a level of expectation on what the race could have been and what it ultimately was. Am I clear in making that assessment?
A little bit, but I expect the first and second place people at a race of UTMB's caliber to be closer than an hour apart. And I don't think that's unrealistic. I'm not aware of this blowback, by the way. But I stand by my earlier statement. And my earlier statement was the women's race was just the women just weren't very good.
Yeah.
And like I said, I stand by that. So to give it context, right, at Western States, we can consider Western States and UTMB the two most high profile competitive 100-mile events in the world, right?
Sure.
6 women were within an hour of each other at Western States.
Yep.
The top 2 women, more than an hour at UTMB. That's not a competitive race. So that's my point with it. And yeah, they're running hard. Trust me, I'm an athlete advocate, just like I should be as a coach, right? I talked about that with reference to the World Track and Field Championships that are going out right now. I understand they're competing really hard. I just think the fields as a whole, particularly on the women's side for UTMB, should just be closer together. It should be a more competitive race top to bottom.
Yeah, I think, and I appreciate that level of objective analysis. Like any sport, if you turn on ESPN or, as it pertains to NFL or NBA, these guys are, like when there's a place for objective criticism for something that's being held out there, I think that can only be good for the growth of the sport in that. It does. I don't know if it professionalizing it is apt, but just making it, just raising the level of competition through analysis, through, I don't even know exactly what your argument was there, but I do think, it was my assessment that the field was there. There were just a couple of dropouts that would have made it a little more top heavy, and the conditions were the conditions, and I don't know.
Well, and to be fair, right? I mean, I put my money where my mouth. I had an athlete that should have been right in the mix of that, and she fell off the side of a mountain and hurt herself. Right, Casey.
Yeah.
So it's not like I'm, standing on some soapbox, completely, completely inoculated
Yeah.
from, actually what's going on. Like I've got skin in the game, and that's, something that I take to task as well. Same thing with the men's criticism, right? We criticize the American men a lot for kind of regressing. I take a lot of that responsibility as a coach, and as a coach of some of the elite men that can perform well in that race, that falls on my shoulders too. So
I will say, for the record, to put a finer point on it, there hasn't been, at least on the men's side, somebody who championed the cause of equality in the gender field more than Koop. So I'll just throw you that bone, because you've been great. Okay, so the 4 a.m. thing, how's that going so far? Or have you broken that?
I've been a little bit more lax with it, to be honest with you. But actually, just a couple days ago, I mentioned to my wife Liz, I'm like, I'm getting back on my routine, and going back to the process. That made the biggest difference in just really everything. I mean, even outside of a training perspective, just like the way I am as the way I am as a coach, as a person, just getting that level of consistency, like just setting that consistent wake up time. It just made all the difference in the world, to me, from a number of different levels. So yeah, still on it. 4:30 a.m. Get plus or minus 30 minutes is kind of the slack that I give myself.
Oh, it's 4:30 a.m.
Yeah, 4:30.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's pretty clear. We don't have to explain that one further for those of you who aren't in the know. You were doing this as of the last podcast that we were doing, however months back it was. Can you put on, historically, because we are talking historical, let's see if you answer this question. Your Mount Rushmore of American ultra runners. Who's on your Mount Rushmore?
Oh my gosh. Wow. I should have came prepared for that question.
Well, that's the point of the speed round. It's not.
Yeah. American or worldwide?
American.
Okay, American. So obviously Scott Jurek and Ann Trayson, right? Those two are kind of absolutely at the top of the list. But then you have to like go beyond the performances and think about some of the people that have been, just like really influential and iconic. So obviously Gordy, right? Running the first Western States.
That fourth slot is hard though, because so far we're 3 for 3 in your list. And
you've already got you got to do you get to like prepare a little bit. I got to kind of.
I'm making you think on your feet, man. This is all somehow related to ultra running training.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So the four, I get four slots on Mount Rushmore.
That's
right?
all you get.
Man, that's hard. That last one's hard to come up with. I almost picked a race director. I'm gonna go with it, King Klober.
Okay.
Because he has had the ability to transcend outside of the sport with his big cowboy personality and what
Ken Klober, who's the founder of the Leadville race and this, I guess, the series.
Yeah.
Okay. I had Anton as my fourth.
Oh, Tony. Yeah. Well, if you're going by internet clicks, Anton would win. Like he would be in the center of Mount Rushmore.
Yeah. I'm talking about,
else in the background.
I'm talking about in moving the sport forward, for making it, for his influence on culture.
Yeah. He's a good choice.
Yeah, for a myriad of reasons. But yeah, the fourth slot is tough.
It's hard for me because I still know him as that kid that ran around with no clothes on in Colorado Springs, right? Because that's where he started all of his training. And I'd see him out on the trails in his like 3-inch split shorts and the shoes that he just, shaved 8 millimeters off the sole. And, so it's hard for me to like put him in. I love Tony. It's hard for me to put him in the Mount Rushmore category because I've got this like,
personal relationship.
Yeah.
I almost went Carpenter, but I'm thinking about just the general zeitgeist and the culture of ultra running.
Yeah, Carpenter's more sky running too.
Yeah. Screw it. I'll ask. If you were to dispense one advice to Tony as his coach, if he took you on as his coach, what would be the first piece of advice you would give him?
Well, hopefully it would have been 10 years ago, right?
Okay.
I can't limit it to one, but okay. I'll put 2. Stop running so much and put some shoes on. So see, I mean, I'll
That was 10
opine.
years ago. I mean, he's running in like the La Sportiva Mutants or something
Yeah,
with like the
well,
8 millimeter stack.
I could opine on this because like Tony will take it harsh, but I think there's a learning point here. So Tony's had like 19 stress fractures throughout the course of his running. He's been running for 19 years, right? So that's one stress fracture a year. And we were all at this Ultimate Direction kind of summit where they had all their athletes there, and he was one of them. And he mentioned this, and so he came back, and I talked to him afterwards. I'm like, so have you learned anything from that time that you've had like 19? You've had like literally like one stress fracture a year for 19 years. That's a pretty good pattern there. Like,
Koop, tell me you warmed up to this before just like blah 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 in his face.
Well, no, I don't have to because I know I'm right. I mean, I could,
Yeah.
go right into it. He's like, nope, I just keep making the same mistakes. I was like, oh God, like you're hopeless.
You follow him on Strava?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I love you, Tony. I love you very much, man. You're my boy. I just don't run so much.
Yeah. Okay, so we did the Rushmore 4 a.m. thing. So you mentioned, maybe this is not such a short answer, but you mentioned, talking about the Italians giving preference to them. So in terms of a home field advantage, and I'm thinking specifically about UTMB and Western states in particular, I think just anecdotally, I'm thinking about the amount of, or the lack of success we've had at UTMB versus Western states when the Europeans come over. Again, this is all like anecdotal. I can't cite like podium finishes and exactly what. I know Francois has had some success, Ryan Sands obviously, but do you think there's something to that about home field advantage? And if so, what is that home field advantage?
Not at the elite side. The elite side, there's no excuse because they have the opportunity to go out to the course early and see it and travel around. They could do almost whatever they want to, in terms of setting their training environment to be as conducive to a race performance as it can be. So I don't buy into that argument, that, Americans don't do good over UTMB because they don't know how to run on the train. That's nonsense. Like they can do what they can. Most of them have a lot of flexibility over where they can train, how they can train, when they go over, and all that other stuff. And the Europeans are the same way. They want to do Western states, they can come over for a month in advance and train. I mean, Tom Evans this year trained in Ethiopia for like 2 months before he came out to Western states. So anyway, I honestly don't think that's big a deal. That is that big of a deal. And
Okay,
in the elite side, if you can't go out and see the course, disadvantage. But the elites have no excuse.
So let's end here. I usually end on a note of gratitude, but you talked about it earlier, especially as it pertains to the race itself. I'm more curious about just I know you've talked about this on previous podcasts maybe, but more of like your general state of the union as it pertains to the sport of trail and ultra running. You have that perspective of where it was, where it currently is, and in particular, where you think it can go. Talk a little bit about that.
I still think it's a really cool sport to be involved in. I mentioned earlier, there's this element of unknown that you don't have in a lot of other sporting venues. It's obviously been growing a lot. I wrote an article about that kind of earlier in the year, and actually, I was mindful of this because I submitted a proposal for the second edition of the book, and I had to pull out some just like user stats and things like that for it. So it's obviously still growing, but at the same time, the leaders within the sport need to do a better job at, and this includes myself, right? The leaders of the sport, race directors, people who manage brands, elite athletes, things like that. They need to do a better job at making the sport more inclusive. I've said my piece about getting more women in the sport, right? That's easy for a lot of people to identify with. That absolutely needs to happen, but we need to bring in more people with different socioeconomic backgrounds. We need to bring in more minorities into the sport. You name it. Joe Gray's trying to do a lot of that on the minority side. There's a really great article on Runner's World that just came out about that. But we need to continue to do that because, we're growing, but there's going to be a time when trail running doesn't grow anymore. and when you do hit those downturns, if you don't have a diversified user base, the downturn is just amplified, and we've seen that with other participatory sports where for whatever reason that participatory sport starts to fall out of favor. And the ones that have built it, running's done a great job with this. The ones that have built in diversification within their user base end up being able to kind of, ride those turbulent times. And the ones that haven't built in a diversified user base, they just can't, and they end up crumbling to a large extent. People go out of business, brands go out of business, and things like that. So we need to continue to ride this wave, but we got to bring in more different, people into the sport as a whole.
Jason Koop, thank you again for regaling us with your tales of 90 plus hours of, Tour de Giants and everything in between. I love you, buddy. Thanks for being on the Billy Yang podcast. Do you have any final words you want to say? Did we cover everything?
Right back at you, man. No, I always have fun. And like I said, we could go around and around and around for hours.
Yeah, but let's do this over beers next time. Are you going to be at the North Face or at Javelina?
I'll be at North Face.
Okay.
Javelina is still a question mark, but I'll definitely be at the North Face race. So,
all right, buddy. Until then, we will catch you on the next episode of the Billy Yang podcast. Thank you all for listening. See you next time. Okay, everybody, that was the episode. Hope you enjoyed that chat with the one and only Jason Koop, a good buddy of mine, somebody I love, just talking about current events, about the state of ultra running, the whole kit and caboodle, and of course, he is one hell of a storyteller. One thing I forgot to get into in the episode itself was that Koop and I have been talking sort of behind the scenes, and he did okay this. I've been encouraging him to start his own podcast because I do think he's such a great guest. And it sounds like things are in the works. I have some older podcast equipment that I'm going to pass along to him, to gift him, to encourage him to start his journey into this new media realm. And I do think he'll be fabulous at it. So keep an eye out for that. Otherwise, you can follow him at Jason Koop on Instagram. He writes the occasional columns for CTS, Train Right. And he has his book. Forget the title of it, but I'll put it right here. And for the video people. And maybe that's not fair to people who are listening to this audio. God, what is this? Now it's going to kill me. I do want to give a plug for his book. So let me see. This is a really good pod here. Jason Koop. I'm looking on Amazon. Jason Koop Ultra Running. Training essentials for ultra running. How to train smarter, race faster, and maximize your ultra marathon performance. You can find that on Amazon. Hopefully, you can find it at a local retail bookstore if that's an option as well. All right, some people to thank. My $7 and up pledges to all the people who support me, continue to support me on any amount. I do thank you from the bottom of my heart. It does, once again, keep this show ad-free. No MeUndies ad, no asking you to buy a mattress from somewhere. It's just, it keeps this show ad-free and it just keeps things moving along. So thank you guys again. But to my $7 and up pledges, I do want to shout them out. Starting with Ryan Lang from Rockwall, Texas, where I will be going tomorrow. Although I don't know where Rockwall is. Hopefully that's near San Antonio. You can come. I want to shout out Matthew Wardberg from... No, let me say that right. Matthew Wardhall from Great Britain for upping his pledge. Thank you, Matthew, for that. I do want to shout you out for that. To Chris Dodd from Hong Kong. I know there's some strife going on in Hong Kong because I follow the NBA and there were some comments made about China and Hong Kong and the whole... I'll be the first to say I'm not super well versed in this, but anywho, thank you, Chris. Who else? Jason McAllister, thank you from Kentucky, where I was actually, I was there. It was, I was just in Cincinnati, Ohio, but I do believe that's like right on the border of Kentucky, and I actually flew into Kentucky, if memory serves right. So thank you to Jason McAllister. I want to pronounce it Versailles, but something tells me in Kentucky it's something like for Sally's or something. Who else? Kelly Sartain from Ozark, Missouri. Missouri is a place near and dear to my heart, a place I've been to, and hopefully we'll go back to one of these days. Michael Hewison from San Jose, or Mike Hewison, let me just say that right. Aaron Perkins from Clearwater, Florida. Lovely Clearwater, Florida. Hope you're doing well, buddy. Thank you for your pledge. And to Adam Temple from Alexandria, Virginia. And, of course, to my continuing executive producers, Gary and Tammy Jones, Mark Grabowski, Mark Griffith, the aforementioned Mark Griffith, who helped flip pancakes and bought Mario and I dinner. Thank you once again, buddy. Wayne Chan, who I got to meet this morning, actually. Really nice guy. He's done races like Wasatch and Grindstone and Run Rabbit, and he does all of this somehow, some way back on the East Coast. Not exactly pancake flag. He does have some access to mountains, but like 7,000 foot mountains, not necessarily the bigger ones. So, but yeah, he was in town for work, and we got to spend some nice trail time out at Griffith Park. And really cool dude. And he's an orthopedist, so I got to pick his brain a little bit for this knee injury that is kind of aggravating me. So thank you, Wayne. Hope you ended up getting that vegan plant-based ramen before you got to leave, because it is amazing. Ramen Hood, shouting them out again, not a sponsor, but it's amazing. Andrew Pollard from Chicago, Brian Sands, Liz McCutcheon. Thank you, as always, Liz, and to Sun Rui. Thank you all the way from China. If you do want to support my podcast and my film work, please consider doing so at patreon.com/Billy Yang. For all mailing inquiries, WeWork, care of Billy Yang Films, 1240 Rosecrans Avenue, Suite 120 in Manhattan Beach, California, 90266. Otherwise, you can reach me at Billy Yang Pod on Instagram, at Billy Yang on Twitter. Sorry. And where else? Billy Yang Podcast on Facebook. And feel free to write to me, billyyangpodcast@gmail.com directly for my email. As I said before, I can't promise I respond to each and every inquiry, but I just trust me, I do read each and every one. So thank you. And to all of you who tag us on social media, on Instagram stories, on Instagram, I see all of those too. So thank you guys for that. So yeah, thank you for letting me join you on your run or your commute yet again. I so appreciate your attention and your willingness to consume my content. That means the world to me. Please continue to be good to each other out there. And I think that's it. I will see you guys next time.